Hey everyone, here's the beginning of our unit on the Progressive Era. You've already done some things relating to the Progressive Era, but this is to give you some more fundamental information on it. Unfortunately, I'm going to know you're very sad. There's no video of me and Georgie on this today because Sunday night football's going on and all that. It will be quick because I have ice cream melting, so that works for your advantage too. So this section is, lower that please, is on the activism of government. How was government becoming more active? So that relates it to our essential question. Make sure you're writing this down, okay? How did government at all levels, so that means local, state, and federal levels, become more active in people's everyday lives? All right, so we're going to write this out Cornell Notes style again. Now, I was going to have a vocab word. I'm not going to make it right now. I might add it next time. So at least you don't have to worry about that right now. So first we're going to discuss how were railroads regulated. Can you please lower that? I know they have background music, but it's distracting me. Can you please lower that? See, this is a mom getting mad.
I want to see this photo.
There's no video on here.
Oh
my gosh. See what I deal with, guys? I'm not getting paid to do this. Hope you guys know I make these videos. All right. How were they regulated? So how was government controlling the railroads? Now, some people, not necessarily big businesses, but like small farmers and merchants, they were upset with the rates that railroad companies were charging. So people were demanding rate regulations.
Mm-hmm.
And by 1880, 14 states actually established commissions. And these commissions were trying to limit freight and storage charges of state chartered lines, right? So if a state had a role of a railroad in that state, they could make sure that there were set rates, that they couldn't be charging more for some than others. Stop being distracting.
I just lost some pool.
They had trouble regulating freight that crossed state lines, however. And by 1887, you have the Interstate Commerce Act. So this was for railroads that were going between states, which many of them did. And they prohibited rate discrimination. So when I say rate discrimination, don't think they were charging people of certain races or backgrounds differently. It's more like they were charging different rates for like long hauls versus short hauls and discriminating in forms like that. So people didn't want to be taken advantage of anymore, and the government started to get involved. Now I want to talk about veterans' pensions. Now, pension was the vocab word I was going to give you guys. And it's basically, pensions still exist, and it's basically like when you retire, getting, a retirement salary, which is, less than your regular salary. That's it in layman's terms. Well, after the Civil War, there was this group called the Grand Army of the Republic. This was mostly Northern veterans that still wanted to, they still got together to have like reunions and celebrations. They were very proud of their status, and they were very invested in how our country was going. And almost every town had a chapter, in the North anyway, had a chapter of the Grand Army of the Republic. And what they did is they urged the government to provide pensions for Union veterans and their widows. Now, pensions cost about $8 billion for the federal government. Keep in mind, the actual Civil War only cost about $2 billion, right? So by 1900, pensions cost about 40%, so that's almost half of the entire federal budget. Now, the federal budget was much smaller back then because think like, they weren't paying for like NASA then, right? Just think of all the things that didn't exist. But that's still a huge chunk of change. Now, what about the southern states? The Confederates were not getting these pensions, so some southern states gave their Confederate veterans some pensions as well. And look this up. The last Civil War pension payment was like not too many years ago, because there was still like a widow who like someone who at a very young age married an old man, something like that. But look it up. It was still paid out not too long ago. So I want to give you some personal history here just to make some connections. So this was my great-great-great-grandfather Casimir, who fought in the Civil War. And this medal right here is for the Grand Army of the Republic. And this is another great-great-great-grandfather, Matthias Stewart. So if you see in the article on the left, it says here that in Bayonne, New Jersey, he was the commander of Bayonne's GAR. It was called the General Sherman Post. And you see here in this other article a few years later, this is 18, I should put the years on. I think this is like 1888 and this is 1892 if I remember. But in 1892, he was running for a councilman for the second ward in Bayonne under the Labour Party. So the progressive era and party politics were largely connected. The Grand Army, they were more closely aligned with the Republican Party, but there was still some overlap between Labour Party members and the GAR. So I just wanted to show you, like, when you read, the Republican Party supported the GAR, that doesn't mean that, like, other parties had no connections to it. All right. Civil service reform. This is something that still exists in its own forms today, but it started during this time period. So between 1865 and 1891, the number of federal employees tripled from 53,000 to 166,000. That means people working for the federal government. So elected officials were trying to control who's getting all these jobs. Because if they could promise someone a job, maybe it was just a friend or a family member they wanted to help out, or maybe it's someone that they could owe a favor to or from. But often it was like, hey, if I get you this job, they would feel confident that they would vote for them. Sometimes maybe even give them some money. Now, by 1882, the Pendleton Civil Service Act was created, and that created a Civil Service Commission. And what that commission did was it oversaw competitive exams. So basically, if you wanted a federal government job, you had to take a test. So this is the merit system. So you only would get this job if you tested well for it, not just because you knew somebody. However, this commission only oversaw 10% of federal jobs. That's a small percentage, right? But because of this start, it then could grow and expand. Now, we're going to talk about police powers. Now, this is an early police unit. There were not, police agencies all across America in its early days. If you want to learn more about that, take our criminal justice honors course. I teach all about the history of policing in the United States. So when I say how are police powers used, don't think of the actual police using powers, but it's how are there more laws and how is the government more like overseeing things, okay? Laws were expanding at this time. People were now criminalized if they mistreated animals, right? Which is good, right? Dog fights shouldn't be legal, right? You know what happened to Michael Vick?
Shouldn't be legal.
Of course, so that's what I'm saying. You got in trouble. Also, children, because it used to be like, hey, if it's your child and you want to, beat them because they didn't clean the bathroom, that was your right.
What?
Yeah, right? There is also laws preventing liquor sales. We'll talk about prohibition later. This
George
is even
didn't
another
clean
time.
the bathroom. I'm gonna have to beat him now.
Prize fighting, right? Like boxing was still a sport, but like you couldn't just like have people like box in your garage and gamble money on it. There were also now laws establishing requirements for professionals. So this is things like doctors. You couldn't just be like, I want to perform surgery on people, right? Teachers. All sorts of jobs.
George
now,
is 3 months old.
Ship captains.
Beat him because he's not.
No, you could not legally beat your children anymore. No. Also, laws mandating racial segregation. So while some of these laws look like they're going in the right direction, you can see some of these laws were not going in the right direction. This is after the Civil War, right? Most of these laws were supported by people in the courts. Now, there were some protests to some of them. Not everyone was agreeing with racial segregation, obviously, but even some of the other laws faced protests as well. Yeah.
I'm glad I'm not taking history this year.
And thanks for sharing. Now, you might hear a lot about tariff policies in the news. Tariffs have been around since the beginning of our country. And keep in mind when we talk about the Republican Party, the Democrat Party at this time, it's not the same as like the Republican and Democratic parties today. Their platforms have changed many times over since the early 1900s and late 1800s. But even though we're talking about things like, laws about children, the police powers, and all these things, most of the political debates were regarding economic policies, right? Things to do with taxes and all that sort of stuff. And there were tariffs. What are they, right? It is a tax on an imported good. So a good brought in from another country. So clothing from China. Things, yes, I know the ice cream's going to melt. I'm trying to hurry up.
It's a whole tub of ice cream.
It's a whole tub of ice cream, yes. Things from England, things from Cuba, wherever. If it was brought in, it was an extra tax put on it. The idea was that tax would make the good more expensive so that people would buy the good made in America. So the goal was that it would support American industry and preserve jobs. Oh, and this is a typo. By the 1800s, there were tariffs on over 4,000 items, not items, right? And putting on these tariffs was a core of the Republican Party agenda at the time. The Democratic Party at the time was not a huge fan of these policies. You can dish me out the ice cream. No. They thought that the federal government shouldn't be involved in how people make profits. They thought, yes, we do need to protect manufacturers in our country and protect the raw materials, but they favored lowering tariffs and encouraging foreign trade because what that did was it actually usually would reduce the overall cost, right? Of course, some of these things were relative on what the good or the product was. But tariffs became a target for reformers. People that wanted to change the way tariffs were put in place. All right, see, that went pretty quickly. It's now time for ice cream, and for you, it is peanut butter cup. Yes.
We know. Campfire.
Yes. Don't forget to put a summary. The summary, when we check your notes to get your full credit, it needs to be there. But also, if you do the summary correctly, your assessments will be a piece of cake because you pretty much did your answers already. All right. Let's watch Sunday Night Football now.
What?